Good morning, everybody, and we welcome you to our Saturday morning Bible study. It's September 12th, 2020. It's the first one of the season. We're very excited to be here with you all. We're recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey. And our moderator today is Thomas from New York.
Hello. And welcome to the Bible study. We'll start out with our quote. I will delight myself in thy statutes. I will not forget thy word. That's from Psalm 119, verse 16.
Thank you.
Comments with that?
Sounds like a good attitude. I'll say.
Well, usually our quotes are a little bit longer than this, but we counterbalance this against what we're reading, right? Which we'll get into our first question, but so I like this, and I guess I'll jump in here. I read somewhere it said that the word is sufficient, right? And so it's like everything to our lives. And so I like this because it's not only that the word is important in our life, but we delight in it. It gives us happiness. It keeps us going. It gets us through the thick and thin, difficult times.
Exactly.
We just don't forget the word, and we don't want to forget it because we enjoy it.
It's the word that becomes the flesh, so it's the living of it. So it's good. I like that.
Yeah. And it is our safety, isn't it?
Yes.
And if the word is sufficient and it's taken out of your life, then nothing is sufficient. So
then you got nothing left.
Yeah, I thought this was good in Matthew Henry, where he said, God's word is a treasure worth laying up, and there is no laying it safely but in our hearts. If we lay it up only in our heads, our memories may fail us. But if our hearts be delivered into the mold of it and the impressions of it, it remains in our souls, and it is safe.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you know how true that is. I know what I remember is because I have taken it into my heart. You take it into your heart, you live it, you can't forget it then. You might not know the exact wording, but it's there. You become it. And it's so important to do this. And in a way, this one sentence here is almost the theme of the whole Psalm 119. Over and over again, the importance of this. So remember that. It's good to memorize. I was never that great in memorizing, but I sometimes do. But if it's in your heart, you will never forget it. It will always be there for you. And it will it will be a delight. That was all. Go ahead.
Yeah, I read Philip Henry writes something about what Matthew Henry says. And he says, once pressing the study of the scriptures, he advised us to take a verse of this psalm every morning to meditate upon. And so go over the psalm twice a year. And that, said he, will bring you to be in love with all the rest of the scriptures. He often said, all grace grows as love to the word of God grows. As the word of God grows. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. Did you say, because what I read was Matthew Henry's father who instructed him to do this, and said he was introduced to Psalm 119 as a child. His father, Philip Henry, told his children to take one verse, just as you read, and it said that perhaps this practice was why Matthew Henry loved the Bible so much that he wrote a commentary that is still used today. And then I also read, and maybe this is a good time, and maybe others of you have found this too, but It's about the history of it. It's the longest chapter in the Bible. This psalm has been of great historical interest. There have been many lengthy works written on this psalm. One of them is by Thomas Manton, a Puritan preacher and writer, and Tom will love this, who wrote a 3-volume work on Psalm 119. Each volume is between...
Yes, sorry to interrupt, but yes, I love that. I thought Charles Spurgeon was long enough for 398 pages. 3 volumes. Oh, my gosh.
He said,
And big volumes.
each volume is between 500 and 600 pages,
Oh my God.
with a total of 1,677 pages. There are 190 chapters in his work, more than one chapter for each verse.
Good grief.
So look what we have to look forward to reading. And then it goes, it says that Luther professed that he prized this psalm so highly that he would not take the whole world in exchange for one leaf of it. And then some great people have memorized this whole psalm and found it a great blessing in doing so. John Ruskin, the 19th century British writer, William Wilberforce, the 19th century British politician who led the movement to abolish the slave trade in the British Empire. I would just like to mention there's a beautiful movie about this called Belle, Belle. You all have to watch it. It's one of my favorite movies. Anyway, and then Henry Martyn, the 19th century pioneer missionary to India, and then David Livingstone, 19th century pioneer missionary to Africa. They memorized this poem. And then this is the pièce de résistance. George Wishart was the Bishop of Edinburgh in the 17th century, not to be confused with another Scot by the same name who was martyred a century earlier. Wishart was condemned to death for his faith, but when he was on the scaffold, he made use of a custom that allowed the condemned person to choose one psalm to be sung, and he chose Psalm 119. That's why. And weeks later, right? So then, but it said before 2/3 of the psalm had been sung, his pardon arrived and his life was spared.
Wow. Wow.
Oh, my Lord.
Wow.
Psalm 119. Who knew, Thomas? Who knew? I sure didn't. That's all I have to say.
He's going to say anything.
Got nothing more than you can.
Well, this is fabulous. I've also often puzzled about this psalm because it seems like when I was growing up, because I grew up in Christian Science, that there wasn't a lot of talk about this, but then occasionally someone would select a verse from Psalm 119. That's kind of how it always was with me. And then I was just looking at this and I'm going, this psalm seems very significant. And I'd never had that sort of told me how significant this psalm is. So it's quite interesting. So I wanted, on the quote, I wanted to add in here, verse 72, the law of thy mouth is better unto me than thousands of gold and silver. So this concept of loving the word and thinking of the word, so here is where the word sustains us more than just gold and silver and other things like that. And it's just a beautiful way to think about how we conduct our daily lives. Because frankly, we're pressed with all sorts of stuff. I get up, I get coffee, I get breakfast, I got to go off to work, I have to do this, errands, all that sort of stuff. And I got to, do these things because I need money to pay the rent or whatever. But here in 72, it's saying that the law of thy mouth is better than gold and silver. That's, yeah.
Well, it's a lesson this week, isn't it?
Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah.
What is really substantial?
Substance.
Yeah. Well, and Jesus, talked about this a lot in his parables, didn't he?
Yeah.
Take no thought for your life, what you shall eat, what you shall drink. God knows you have need of all these things. But seek ye first.
The kingdom of God.
And his righteousness will be added unto you.
And everything else will follow.
I think it's the love. This it conveys so much a deep love for God, really, and therefore that's why you put him first. You don't go for the breakfast first before you do the lesson. And I think in science, I studying from wherever I was, it shows you after a while something is missing if you haven't done the lesson. As opposed to being able to go about your day before in the evening get to the lesson. I think it comes where as loving God grows, you seek to put him first.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
For sure.
And we were taught here in the morning, your thought is like a sponge. It'll just absorb the first thing. And therefore, the first thing should be your lesson. And let it be filled with those truths of Bible and science and health. And of course, we also begin with the three daily duties. And God is life. God is my life. God is the only pure and perfect life. And God is mind. God is my mind. God is the only pure and perfect mind. That starts your day wonderfully. And yeah, if you don't do it, you feel like something is dreadfully missing.
Time to lay back down and start over.
Yep.
Well, and I was reading in Martha Wilcox recently. She says, a Christian Scientist, paraphrasing, you can't practice Christian Science part-time.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It's like, a mathematician can't practice mathematics part of the time and then forget about it, the rest of the time. If you're
It's a way of life. I mean, if it's your way of life, that's what you have to do.
Right. And I think that's what Psalm 119 is all about. It's a certain thing. Do we know, I'm curious, Tom, do we know, did David actually write this? Because I know some of the Psalms are...
I kept reading about that. Everybody seems to talk about, who wrote this psalm? And some people think David wrote it, and others are just unsure. So it doesn't seem to be a strong indication of who wrote it, but it could have been.
Well, the reason I ask is, what came to me as I was reading it was, this could have been one of the last Psalms that David actually wrote, because it felt like David was kind of pouring out all of his experience over his entire life and all of the things that he'd gone through and the battles he fought and all, the straying that he strayed and, and all of his pouring forth all of his faults and stuff like that. And then bringing it all back to what he had learned in his life was his first and only love. And that was for God and God's laws and statutes.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Expound on that, really, because this is one of the things I thought when I was reading Psalm 119 is it covers, and I've read this also in commentary too, it covers just about everything. So you have to have what you just described. But if you could talk more about that, because I think that's very significant about Psalm 119.
Well, I just felt like, here was David in the twilight of his years, just saying, this is the legacy that I want to leave mankind. And he just poured his heart out and wrote this, and and left it for us as the best that he could offer.
In reading, sorry.
Go ahead, Bruce.
In the research of Psalm 119, there have been many others that have commented, this sounds like David. Of course, there are others that speculate others, but there's nothing more than speculation. But the point being, never written down that anybody with spiritual sense could see. This sounds like him.
It does. I mean, hard to imagine who else could have written it at the time.
And also, whoever wrote this had to have been very close to the Father. And I hope I'm not jumping ahead, but I think it's an appropriate time to make this comment. You know, the thing is written in groups of 8, and one group of 8 for every letter in the Hebrew alphabet, 22 of them. And as it was written in its original Hebrew, all of the lines of the first 8 start with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph. In the second group of 8, they all begin with the second letter, Beth, and so on throughout the psalm. And for anybody who's ever tried a shot at maybe writing poetry or lyrics or music, you can realize it's a gift. In other words, for to write this entire psalm like that, it had to have been the Spirit moving that would have done something like this, because it was a magnificent composition.
Like Mary Baker Eddy's hymns.
Yeah.
Who else was trying to speak?
Well, in reading Matthew Henry's complete Bible commentary, I really like these where it said, these are the breathings and elevations of David's soul to God. It is a chest of gold rings, not a chain of gold links, because they were all, each verse, the different areas were done separately and then later put together. And he said, this is an excellent means of maintaining constant communion with God.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
If I understood that, what you were saying right, is I guess this is kind of how I was looking at Psalm 119, is it doesn't tell us a story. There's not sort of like a beginning and an end, and like it all sort of hangs together, and that's how you understand it. It almost is like each verse is powerful enough to stand on its own. I don't know if that's kind of part of what you were saying, but this, to me, it really takes a lot to put so much into a single verse, is what David or the writer was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then to do this for the longest psalm in Psalms is quite amazing.
Something that struck me while I was reading this was the great humility that David was expressing, that it wasn't him, it was all about God, and that he knew that sometimes he maybe have missed the mark and that he needed God to help him to he was asking for help to get back on that, pick himself up and get back on the road if he did slip. And that, I thought it was comforting that here's this great man who humbly, just, he was nothing without God.
And that was his greatness.
Yeah, it certainly was his greatness.
I found 8 words that describe God's word in Psalm 119. And the first one was law, God's instruction for his people. Word, God's thoughts and speech. Testimonies, God's ways written down as a witness and reminder to us. Ways, how God wants the journey of our lives to be lived. Precepts, God's order, the way he has made life to work. Statutes, the law or ordinance that will bring a blessing if followed. Commandments, God's action, what God wants us to do. And rules, what is the just and the right thing to do.
Nice.
One of the things I read about this was that it wasn't just like this was suddenly poured out. It was pouring out, but not sudden, but that was like embroidery, stitch by stitch, through long, quiet hours, with a love for the subject and a delight in creating it. And that made me really appreciate doing stitchery before, that it does take a lot of focus and love and time and careful and exactness. And it just made me really appreciate how much we should be appreciating God's word, and how through that quiet hours, stitch by stitch.
Along those lines, something that I had read was that there was a thought that David had written this over his entire life, so it was kind of like a diary. And the thing that's interesting about it being the Hebrew alphabet is that in the Bible we see from Alpha to Omega, and which is the Greek alphabet. And it's like the complete from one end to the other. And I think that's, can't remember if it was Mrs. Eddy or one of the commentaries, relates the city Foursquare in Revelation to that perfection of the alphabet from one end to the other.
Thank you. Well, maybe we should be like Matthew Henry and take a verse of it each day and think about it and work with it. And they're very short. It's not that hard to do. Sure would enhance our lives greatly.
And it means you do it twice a year, which is...
We end up doing twice a year.
Right.
Yes.
You could have half of the 2022 calendar done right now.
There we go. That's for next year.
There's my submission.
Thank you, Jeremy.
119, that's it.
2022 is full now, and we have some for 2023 left over.
Wow. Goodness.
So did you want to go through this question at a time? Or
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the first question. I didn't really say that, but that what is interesting about this psalm? And then we've started into question 2. What does the psalm tell us about God? And so we've gotten into that. But I find this fascinating. So let's just, if there's more people have to say about either one of these, but, and number 2 is as you go through the psalm, and this is one of the things I did this summer, is every day I read something from this, and sometimes I read it through completely, sometimes I read through a couple times, but I just read it a lot. And so it's amazing to me what you would see in here, because it seems like it's a person saying something, and for the most part. But then as I go through here, he's telling us about God, or the attributes of God, or qualities of God. And I thought, you can learn a lot about God by reading through this. So anybody has more they want to add to those first couple questions?
Well, I was struck, and the first thing that I saw that it tells us about God is that he commands us to obey his commandments. He commands us to obey his law. That was right there at the beginning. And throughout the Bible, God is a jealous God, and all this stuff.
I like, too, that he make me understand the way of thy precepts. So God gives us the understanding how to follow his precepts.
And he is the one who knows, so he is the one we must learn from. That's it.
Yeah, and I love the fact that he is our teacher. It's over and over again, teach me, teach me. One of the things that Matthew Henry says about, I guess it's verse 19, he says, Lord, show thy commandments to me as long as I live. Give me a growing acquaintance with it. I am a stranger, and therefore in need of a guide, a guard, a companion, a comforter. Let me have thy commandments always in view, for they will be all this to me, all that a poor stranger can desire. I just thought that was beautiful because that is what God is to us when we come to Him with an empty vessel and let Him fill it, and to come humbly knowing He is the teacher. And, you know, our lives teach us lessons if we see it that way. Instead of grumbling over experiences, you know, ask God, well, what are you trying to teach me? What more do I need to know about you to overcome this situation? And then pray those prayers. Let God teach you. It's amazing what you will learn, and you will become a victor over the problem. You won't be the victim, but a victor, as was read at a Wednesday meeting. So let God teach you, and be grateful for the experiences that will teach you. They come to teach you a lesson. That is all. Mrs. Eddy has said that. And once the lesson is learned, the difficult experience will go.
Make every problem a blessing.
That's it. Every problem can be a blessing.
When it ceases to bless, it ceases to occur. So.
Yes, that's right.
Well, and one of the other things that this psalm says about God is that He is good.
Yeah.
There's nothing bad about God. So we can expect every lesson to be a good lesson. And Mrs. Eddy, thinking about God as our teacher, you know, Mrs. Eddy refers to something that she calls the divinity course.
Yeah.
And what is that?
That's when God teaches you directly, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I remember many years ago, people talking about taking class instruction. And I thought it was so bizarre that some people were so proud of who they took class from. And unfortunately, most of them made a mess of their lives as a result of that pride. And it was, Mrs. Evans who explained it's the divinity course that matters. It's when you go past your human instruction and you get a relationship with God that teaches you what you really need to know.
I must say, the beginning of the Blue Book, the Divinity course, there, I paid attention this time, and there's a lot in there to learn.
Yeah.
It's the heart, I feel.
Besides the divinity course in God, which is, of course, the ultimate, we do have Mrs. Eddy as our teacher. And then we have all these people that she taught, Martha Wilcox, Kimball, Bicknell Young. I mean, this is the finest teaching there is. That's why I'm sure in the manual, it was required to have her signature in order for teaching to continue. Enough teaching had been done. It's all here. I'm still amazed, that so many scientists, lifelong scientists, they haven't read through Science and Health. They haven't read through Prose Works. They don't know.
They're afraid to read the unauthorized literature.
Yeah,
or if they do it in secret.
Yeah.
Yes. And, do let these lessons come to teach you. If you have an untoward situation, don't just blow it off, but ask God what it is you need to learn. Because this is what I see in the world where it's happening to our nation. We have one thing after the next going on, and people aren't paying any attention. This is warnings. God is trying to knock us on the head and tell us a few things. So let's learn these lessons. Let's not just go from problem to problem, but from glory to glory. Hey, Bruce.
I was just going to say, another thing this psalm, just reading through it, the impression left with me was that God is the stabilizing influence. Now, that's not a word in the Psalms, although I would like to read a couple verses if I could. Forever, O Lord, thy word is settled in heaven. Thy faithfulness is unto all generations. Thou hast established the earth, and it abideth. So, regardless of how much we may have wavered one way or another, God is always there, and only He is the stabilizing influence.
Thank you. And how wonderful, people who are having stability problems to think of these things. Again, God speaks to us in the Bible in so many ways. Listen and be wise. It is the chart of life.
Verse 105, I marked out for this question. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And I was thinking about how before I came here, there didn't really seem to be any way forward. I didn't have any light to light the path. But after I came here, it was just really bright. So I quite like that one.
Thank you. That is beautiful. A light and a lamp.
Go
ahead, Shardy.
I made a list of all the things that God had said that God's is, his attributes, and then what David asked for, and they match. And it's pretty interesting. There are about 20, more than 20 in each. And they go together.
A couple examples.
Oh, okay. Well.
Yeah, please go through them. That's fascinating. Thank you.
Well, okay, here we go. You're blessed if you're undefiled. Keep the test. He has the testimonies. He's the righteous judgment. He rebukes the proud. God gives the understanding, the truth, the mercy, the liberty, the comfort. He's our portion. He's good. He doeth good. He's the law. He's kindness, faithful, saves us, makes us wise. He's a lamp unto our feet, our hiding place, our shield. He shines upon us and gives us peace. And then, shine through the end. And then David asked for life. Hide me. Show me thy commandments. Remove me from reproach and contempt. Quicken me. Remove me from the ways of lying. Strengthen me. God's our strength. Understanding. Teach me. Incline my heart. Turn my eyes away from vanity. And I looked at in the Amplified, that's idols. Turn away my reproach. Mercy. Salvation. Take not thy word of truth from me, and put it in my mouth. Give me favor. Teach me good judgments. Hold me up. Deliver me. Let my soul live.
Thank you.
Nice. Questions 2 and 4. Thank you.
That covers a lot of
The beginning of 116, it says, "But I love the Lord because he has inclined his ear unto me. Therefore will I call upon him as long as I live." That God hears us. He's heard my voice and my supplications. I love the Lord because he has heard my voice and my supplications.
One of the things I found helpful in looking up is that each one of these sections, these alphabetic Hebrew alphabets, the letter itself means something, and it sets the theme for the section of 8 verses. For example, Aleph means to study. So if you think of that in terms of those first 8 verses, you're really studying God's laws and commandments so that they can, as Mary said before, that they can come into your heart. And then Beth means understanding. As you study, this understanding comes. And then Gimel means literally in Hebrew a path. It provides you with a path of life. And then Daleth means a door or a gate. It's almost like an open door to heaven. And then He means the number 5, or the 5 foundation books of the Jewish law. And it goes so on and so on. But I thought that Lamed, I guess that's how you pronounce it, Lamed, it's what we were talking about earlier about the teaching. Lamed means good. It also means to teach, to prick, to sting, or to incite. So, like was said earlier, if you're getting a lesson in life, it's to teach you. And sometimes it has to prick you, like what happened to Paul. Why kickest thou against the pricks? So it's very interesting to know what each one of these Hebrew alphabet letters mean. It does set a theme.
Thank you. Yes.
No wonder that guy got 3 books out of this.
Yeah, 3 books. It'll make for some good winter reading.
Where did you find that?
Where did I?
Oh.
Well, I found it by Googling each word. It took a while, but it was fascinating work.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. It's called internet research, right?
Thank you. One of the things that I had found in the commentary part was that somebody had said most read their Bibles like cows that stand in the thick grass and trample under their feet the finest flowers and herbs. And it made me think when I used to open up a new pasture for the cows, you would think they would start at the one end and eat their way to the other end, but instead what they would do is they would run into the field, trample all the grass, and then they'd go back through and try to eat the grass that they hadn't trampled. And it made me think about maybe that's the way I unfortunately handle the Bible, is that I've been trampling through it and not never even occurred to me to study what each letter of the alphabet might mean. And I think that is just a wonderful thing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
So one of the verses that stood out to me, there are lots. I mean, I guess we could spend years on this, but I mentioned one that I really like. This was verse 99, and this kind of gets to our earlier discussion about the word. It says here, I have more insight than my teachers. And so how does he know more than his teachers? Because he meditates on the word. So he's thinking about God, and he's studying God, and he knows more than the people who should be teaching him. So if you think about then, what is our source? And this kind of tells me our sources of everything we need comes from God.
Well, and also, doesn't this illustrate the progress, the spiritual progress of mankind? I mean, isn't this, shouldn't we all be able to say we have more understanding than our teachers? Because our teachers gave us the best, and we took that, and God gave us even more.
I think, too, testimonies is like on Wednesday night. It's when we give a testimony of how we've proved or demonstrated it. And it's like the acts, the proofs, are more important than the words from some teachers.
You know, it's interesting. Somewhere it's in miscellaneous writings. I remember reading it, and I don't know where it is. But anyway, Mrs. Eddy alludes to, she says something to the effect that she will have more in common with future generations than she has with the people she was dealing with at that time. And I thought, wow, because that's who we are. And it is, because she was expecting the understanding to grow and be more readily accepted and used. And we do understand during her time, she was having a battle with too many people not understanding or accepting. And perhaps that is still true in some cases, but then there is this remnant who is getting it and running with the ball. And I thought, wow, I could almost feel her just reaching out. And it's what Gary was saying. We are increasing in our understanding of this. It's unfoldment and going brighter and brighter unto the perfect day.
Well, she was a pioneer. And in his own way, maybe David was a pioneer also. And this should be true of every pioneer.
Actually, that was something that was said in one of the commentaries, was that David didn't have the whole Bible to work with. He had just Moses and the earlier prophets to learn from. But he also had the prophets in his time, like Nathan, that he communed with and listened to and learned from. But then, as everybody's pointing out here, and the ultimate is to actually take that and then see what God says about it and go with what God says.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
He has the last word, God.
Well, yeah, and this, we should all look forward to the spiritual progress. I mean, does anybody know everything there is to know about God?
No.
No. I mean, Jesus might have, but nobody around him was capable, of getting it. I mean, he even said that I have many things that I could say to you, but you wouldn't understand, so I won't. But he did promise the Comforter. And that's what we are blessed with, is the final revelation. But still, revelation is personal. We all have our own relationship with God, and God reveals to us what we need. And, and spiritual progress is eternity. I don't know if I will ever know everything that there is to know about God, but I'm looking forward to learning as much as I can.
I think that's why the right understanding of God is so important, because many people still think that it's only through someone that you can know God, and it's not true at all. Because to really know that He is with you all the time, when you turn to Him, He does give the answers. Like we all are experiencing, sometimes something comes up and you turn your thought to Him and you're directed to a book, maybe the hymnal, whatever. And the answer is there. It's like the testimony from California that I read. He was worried and he got home and he turns on the television and hears something that explains, gives him comfort from what he was feeling. God is always present with everyone everywhere, and we can learn of who He really is with us all the time. Therefore, and He has all the perfect answers all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. There would not be the problem if there weren't the answer.
Yeah.
The answer always comes with the problem. And if we know that and open our thought, we will get it. And again, we're verse 71. It is good for me that I have been afflicted, that I might learn thy statutes. So nobody likes affliction. But if we're stumbling over it, then there's something that we need to learn, that we're refusing our obedience. So we just keep at it, and God will reveal what it is. And progress is always being made. Progress is God's law. You should look for it daily, even when you think you aren't making progress. If you are striving in the truth, Mrs. Eddy says that too, you are making progress. And to deny your progress is disobedience. To say you're getting worse or things aren't right, it's disobedience. You have to. This was something Mr. Evans taught me, because there was a time I felt so stalled, I wasn't making progress. He said, every time you talk to me, you tell me of your progress. And it was hard because I was looking for it in physicality. My progress is not being made in that. You don't look there for it. It's what thoughts were I overcoming? How was I expressing more love, more joy, more gratitude in my life? That is the progress. And if you look for it and focus on that, and sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does, whatever, but you focus on that, you will find the physical problem yielding as well. But if you refuse obedience to that, and all you do is focus, this is not working, or this is getting worse, well, What is it? You receive what you believe. Be careful what you say. Be your best friend when you talk to yourself, not your worst enemy.
And that is why it is so important to recognize that afflictions are opportunities to learn something really, really good. What does Mrs. Eddy say about problems?
Proofs of
They are proofs of God's care.
Trials. Yes.
Or trials.
trials, things, the problems, trials.
Are proofs of God's care. Well, whoa, what a positive attitude, right?
And she didn't speak lightly, because she sure had them, and she overcame them. And also she calls our time on this earth what is like a schoolroom, right? A schoolroom.
That's preparatory.
Preparatory, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Tom.
I thought we'd move on to question 3. So most of the questions I wrote for today were more broadly speaking, and people could talk about something specific. But I thought 3 would be useful because this would be a verse that every single one of us has read and thought about in some way. Okay? So, and I do apologize because the way it's written, sometimes it's like, I don't understand what this means, right? But if you look at Bible Hub or read a different version of the Bible, it kind of opens it up a bit. So, question 3, what does this verse mean? Mine eyes prevent the night watches, that I might meditate in thy word. That's Psalm 119, verse 148.
When I read this, the first thing I thought of was on Watch's Prayers and Arguments, page 34. It says, watch. Christian scientists must work daily to annul the prayers of the unrighteous. Those who unrighteously pray that the Christian Science prayers cannot heal the sick. So I was thinking of the night watch as being like this anti-watch against us. So.
Well, all I had to do was go to the 1828 Webster's Dictionary. The word prevent means to anticipate or precede something. To me, this meant I anticipate and look forward to the night watches because that is my opportunity to meditate in God's word.
Thank you. And that, in the commentaries, beautifully written. Tom sent one from Spurgeon and, of course, Matthew Henry. Beautifully written. That is what they are saying. Just that. We look forward. It's the most important thing there is to do is this communion with God. And it should not be tiring. We should love to do it. So sometimes I'll be up for hours. If you're praying and working in the truth, it is not tiring. And God will give you the needed rest, maybe at another time. But my goodness, I thought this psalm is full of watching. Now, what the heck happened to the Christian Science movement? Because we know in Mrs. Eddy's home, they were round-the-clock watching. I brought this out before, but I'm going to do it again. Chapter 21, Spiritual Footsteps. The morning watch hour was from 9 to 10 when each student returned to his or her room to do the mental work to destroy fear and to recognize the presence and power of God as supreme in the home, as well as in the whole universe. This work did not vary from day to day, except where special instructions were needed and given to us. There was another general watch hour from 3 to 4, and the last from 8 to 9. Everyone, including our leader, joined in these periods of watching. In addition to these, each student had an individual watch hour. For instance, every night I worked mentally from 11 to midnight. At 8 p.m., Mrs. Eddy always went out on the porch and sat in the swing until 9, which was the last general watch hour for the day. I always felt that it was during this hour that she worked for the world and encompassed all humanity with her love. But when she came in to retire, she often called me to her side to say good night, and the love that she radiated was almost more than I could stand. It affected me to such a degree. This general program for each day never varied, and there was nothing to indicate that a day was Sunday or a weekday. Sometimes they would last all night long, and I can recall a time when I did not remove my clothes for 72 hours. I can't emphasize this point enough, the need for watching. And to me, the spiritual footsteps, Carpenter's books, which tell us the life of Mrs. Eddy and how she used and demonstrated the science, is absolutely essential. And the fact that it is considered unauthorized, as far as I'm concerned, is criminal. And as much as you can shape your day on that, what I just read to you, how wonderful that would be to do these watches so faithfully. And many of you have told us that when you come here, that's the one thing maybe that's really sold you on this church was the watching, because nowhere else had you heard about it. And again, it came about when Mrs. Evans was under the gun and being excommunicated. She'd gone up to Boston and looked around and realized the board of directors, what she was dealing with. She came back and she couldn't sleep at night. She would walk the floor. She was agonizing over what she saw and felt. And then before we knew this, before we knew about the watches, she would tell people to get up at a certain time and pray. So we started that way. And then later we got the books that said, yes, this is what we should be doing. And the Psalms, the Bible, watch. It's amazing that I went through a good part of my life without knowing this. So take that day, take your watch, certainly in the morning, a watch to handle fear. That's a big bugaboo. We all need to do this. When you're up at night, watch and pray. And if you feel you don't know how to do a watch, we have a whole section on our website. We talk about it often. And the book Watches, Prayers, and Arguments teaches you. And you learn, how do you learn anything?
Practicing it.
By doing it.
Do it.
You do a good watch. When you're done, you'll have a sense of peace that you've conquered whatever the era is trying to claim. So.
And if you have trouble sleeping at night, there's a reason. The world needs your prayers. It's the world reaching out for the truth. So give it the truth.
You don't mind if I share my story here? When I very first came to Plainfield, brand new, Mrs. Evans looked at me and says, okay, we're going to make a watchdog out of you. So she gave me time and she said, okay, get up and do your watch. No instruction as to how, just go and do it. The next day, we were talking on the phone and she asked me again, now when was your watch time? I told her. He says, okay. The next day, I got up and did my watch at the same time and I felt this enormous influx of light and joy and love. It just enveloped me. So guess what? Later that morning, I was on the phone again with Mrs. Evans. First question out of her mouth was, well, did you feel it? I said, I sure did. And I didn't even have to ask her what she was talking about.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
On the topic of watching, just had to share that story.
Thank you.
Good, thanks.
And I remember when we would have those times in the reading room, which partly why she was excommunicated, because she was told the group reported to Boston that she was teaching classes in the reading room. She said we were going to go to the reading room and pray and work because no one went to the reading room. So every Thursday night when it was open, we would go and pray and work. And sometimes she would give a topic to pray about. And I remember once there was a topic and we were all praying. And I remember opening my eyes and looking around. Well, everybody looked so, their faces were all screwed up and they looked so intent and like they were in total misery. And I looked at Mrs. Evans and she had the most beatific look on her face. Yeah, an angelic, just like she was communing with the Father. That left such an impression on me. So, I mean, if you're watching and you're just, watch out. That's not what it's about. So we've learned so many lessons about watching, which I'm so grateful for. And I'm so grateful to those of you. Dear Elsie, she's always asking, how many watchers did we have last night? Anyway, we're grateful for those of you that join us at the Unity Watch and who've taken your individual watches during the day and or night, which many of you have, and do it faithfully.
And that's what David meant when he wrote verse 148.
That's what he meant, because you love to do it. Just like Florence said, if you don't do the lesson, if you don't do the watch, you feel there's something wrong. And what did you say, Jeremy, when you came here about watching news events?
Oh, well, for the longest time before coming, I couldn't even watch the news. And it was funny, when I first came, the first thing I read was the Dixon letter. And I told Mary that, I guess this church has real things to do. And I started watching, and eventually with time, it brought real peace. And now if I look at the news and something seems like it's important to watch about, I watch and I get peace about it, and it's not a big deal anymore. I'm so grateful for that.
Thank you. And he writes watches for us, and if you read them and use them during the Unity Watches. And anyone who wants to write a watch, it's a great discipline to learn to write a watch, and you can submit it. Some of you do that, and we're very grateful. And if there's some watches you don't feel are up to snuff in your book, then fine, get something that you feel resonates, as they say, with you. To write 3 Unity Watches week after week after week after week after week after week. we appreciate all the help we can get.
I think we should also remember that the page 49 of the Watches, Prayers, and Argument, hear, O Israel, for the Lord our God is one God. Because in there where it says you are to come only in the divine strength, I think that's so helpful, because I think initially it's as if it's your strength or your doing, but not at all. It's only the strength of God in which we do it. And that takes away that, as if some strenuous exercise. It's not, or shouldn't be.
Thank you.
Or also, if you have some hidden agenda or some will that you want a certain thing to happen, we can't go watch with this preconceived notion that this is what I'm praying for and I want this to happen. And I think that's what Florence was talking about too. It's thy will be done, Father. And that watch is included at the bottom of all our Unity Watches, right?
Yes, it's also on the bottom of the Daily Watch page too.
Yes, because that's a great reminder. It's very easy to slip into a willful sense. And from Science and Health that I love, whatever holds human thought in line with unself love, what happens?
Divine power.
Yes, you receive directly the divine power. So when you are doing a watch that is unself love, the watches aren't about praying for yourself. They're praying for church, community, nation, world. So when you are doing that unself praying, you are receiving directly the divine power. And that power is omnipotent. Never forget that. You always start out with the truth, that omnipresence of God. You get into handling whatever's troubling, but then you end with that sense of God's total dominion and omnipresence omniscience, omnipotence. That is a watch.
And that answers a lot of number 4.
So now, anyone else, there's a lot written about it that was quite beautiful in commentaries.
Anything else on number 4?
Well, on number 3, one of the things I wanted to say is, or one of the reasons I wanted to include it was, not the only reason, but, if people aren't familiar with watches, which I know we were talking with Christian Scientists, a lot of us have never heard of it before, and you might think it's kind of peculiar or something. But here we see that watches are biblical in nature. It's always been out there on the watches. This is nothing new. So we should all know about this.
No. And what did Jesus tell his disciples? What I say unto you, I say unto all.
Watch.
Yeah.
They have military watches keeping guard. And this was from Matthew Henry. It is better to take time from sleep than not to find time for prayer. We have access to God at all hours, and if our first thoughts in the morning are of God, they will help to keep us in his, he says, fear, but in his love all the day long. So, and many people get trouble because they're waking up in the night. Well, we were taught here that's a sign. God's tapping you on the shoulder to get up and watch. Something's going on. You need to work. Don't grumble about it. Get to work. And you'll find when you've done your work well, you'll get back to sleep. In the days of Mrs. Evans, if we had a watch that failed, what would happen, Joe?
You get a phone call in the middle of the night.
What the heck are you doing? Oh my. So yeah, your watch was either successful or not, and you heard about it when it was not. And it was some discipline, believe me, because we know it's not easy to keep your thought focused for that amount of time, and our watches were an hour. So you got to keep at it, and it would be easy. And if you were off in dreamland or something, that phone would ring. Oh my! So it's a good discipline. We learned a lot.
Good training.
Yeah. Yes.
And those who took it as training were greatly blessed.
Mm-hmm.
Those who were offended by it left.
Yeah, and many did. And many did.
Well, really personal because you have to do it. It isn't like it looked like you were being asked to do it from somebody, but really it was from God, and God still asks us. I still think that pressure should be on for us now.
Thank you, because that really is my point. You might not be getting phone calls in the middle of the night about your watch, but that pressure, it is from God. And it's always there to be alert and working. And it can only bless you. Again, it can help. Maybe this is what will lift you out of some difficulty. In fact, we had a testimony a few weeks ago. Someone, he'd been suicidal. He said what he learned in our church was how to watch and how to pray. And that was the key for him. And he was healed of all of that. So
I think it's clear absolutely will help you if you are not doing well.
Every time I had, when I first got here, every time there were problems, I would always go to watching, and the problem would dissipate, or I would get peace or get answers. I would get healings, physical healings, even if I suffered through the watch. It was just incredible.
Thank you. And Linda and Shardy too, and now Nancy, there are some who are writing watches. Of course, Carol and Bruce. And Linda, very often when we get a news event, she'll get online. She gets to get what's behind what is going on, because a lot of what happens, it never is what it appears to be. And when you watch, when you work, our work needs to be specific to break asunder the era, whatever that era is claiming. because sometimes, especially the media, gets us off on a wild goose chase as to what's really going on. So I'm grateful we have a good group of watchers in Plainfield, and now that is spreading amongst you all listening. And also Parthens, he is a watcher par excellence, and you can tell it by his forum contributions.
And he knows what he's addressing too.
He knows what he's addressing. Yes, he does. Mm-hmm. He's not fooled by outward appearances.
And that's what we should all strive for.
Yes.
Well, that's a good way to end the Bible study. So we have a watch tonight. And,
yeah.
Yep.
I hope we all enjoyed this discussion of this, the longest psalm.
No, this was fascinating.
It was wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
Again,
Thank you.
Who knew any of this? I did not. Thank you.